Welcome to the Exploress. Time traveling through history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. Rise and shine. It's time to get up and start our day in the life of a 1920s American gal. Pull up your rayon stockings and turn up that radio. Let's go traveling. But first, a shout out to some of my patrons. My newest pirate queens, Kai, Taylor, Catherine, Courtney, and Michelle. My newest boss ladies, Hildur, Ava, and Mamie. My warrior queens, Kiana, Sarah. Two wonderful Alexises, Amanda, Kate, Ika, June, Neve, and Sloan, and Samantha. My Imperial Empresses, Katie, Bridget, Faye and Whimsy Soapworks, Samara, and Teresa. And my Lady Pharaohs, Cheryl, Sophie, Kot, Kate, Laura, and the fabulous Courtneys. Patrons play such a huge role in keeping the show going. For a couple of bucks a month, they support an independent creator and get access to exclusive bonus episodes, the Exploress yearly calendar, full interviews with guests, and more. To find out all about it, just go to my website, theexploresspodcast.com. Two more quick notes before we get started. First, I've finally got Exploress merch back up and running. You can now buy Exploress-themed goodies like my lady-centric timelines, maps, and art prints at my printable shop, which you'll find at my website. Second, I've got a novel out. Nightbirds is a 1920s tinted YA fantasy about girls who will gift their magic with a kiss for a price. Buying merch or my book are both great ways to support me, but also I'm just glad you're here. Today, we're waking up in a New York apartment on a balmy summer Saturday in 1923. Just like in all eras and countries, the type of house we're living in depends a lot on our family's income and our social situation. The post-World War I era is, overall, one of prosperity and opportunities the likes of which we Americans have rarely seen before. Our economy is booming, and the increasingly affluent middle class is enjoying a higher quality of life. Industrial production is growing. Soon, the USA will account for almost half of the world's output. Per capita income is also on the rise. When we picture the 1920s, we think of shiny dresses and fine suits, fast cars, and luxury. But this era is chock full of contradictions. Some people are Gatsby-level rich, but many more are George Wilson poor. Many families are living at or below the poverty line. And these boom times seem to whistle right past some groups of Americans. A report from 1928 will show that over 2/3 of the country's indigenous people live on less than $200 a year. Of the 25,000 Mexicans who settle in America every year of the 20s, most remain devastatingly poor, with many living without flushing toilets or regular access to fresh vegetables and meat. Farmers, too, are struggling, weighed down by long-term debt, high taxes, and a fall in crop prices. In the 1920s, the distribution of wealth shifts towards the already very rich. The share of income the wealthiest 1% of Americans receive will rise from 12 to 19%. So, the rich are getting richer, the poor are staying poor, and this general prosperity, and the opportunities that come with it, do not extend to everyone. But since we have to settle ourselves somewhere, we're going to start our day as middle-class gals in New York City, and everything that comes along with it. Let's head to the bathroom first, shall we? We're likely to have a flushing toilet and a shower, but we're not guaranteed to have electricity or air conditioning or central heating. At the beginning of the 1920s, only 35% of homes are wired for it. By 1932, only about 10% of rural America will be electrified, and about half of those people will have to buy their own country home power plants. By the end of the 1920s, the overall percentage of wired homes is 68%, but it's much higher in cities. AC is actually invented in 1922, but it won't become affordable, and thus a household staple, until after World War II. Heaters have been around since the 1800s, with central heating invented in 1919, but it won't become affordable until the 1950s. So those of us who don't have electricity will probably be using gas lamps. What's in our medicine cabinet? There are a couple of brands that will look familiar, including Vaseline, Band-Aids, Palmolive, and Maybelline. Today, though, we're going to reach for the Kotex box because it's that time of the month. For lots more information about how we dealt with menstruation through the ages, check out our Blood Magic episode. For now, though, let's meet the most popular brand of sanitary product on the 1920s market, Kotex. Although there are others, such as Hoosier's Sanitary Belt, quite literally a belt that holds your cloth against your body, Lister's Towels, the first disposable pad, My Lady Dainty, a washable pad, and May-Kits, a build-your-own gauze pad situation. They are often bulky or downright uncomfortable, and thus they aren't super popular. In 1927, the Johnson & Johnson Company surveys thousands of American women to find out exactly what they want from their sanitary products. And surprise, surprise, women in the 1920s want a comfortable, functional pad in discreet, compact packaging. Who would have guessed? Interestingly, although Kotex has cornered the market, many women complain that their pads are too large, thick, or stiff. Others report taking scissors and modifying them at home, or wearing Vaseline to help with chafing. So why is Kotex so popular if the product isn't actually that good? The short answer? Advertising. Kotex has been running a massively successful ad campaign in women's magazines like Good Housekeeping and Ladies' Home Journal. Their ads cleverly find a way to market the product without ever explicitly stating what the pads are even for. After all, none of us want public discussions about menstruation. Ew! Their advertisements promise that pads come in
a plain wrapper,
and that
there is nothing on the blue Kotex package except the name.
Their Ask for It by Name slogan becomes an important part of the company's campaign. One 1922 ad reads,
"Easy to buy. All embarrassing counter conversation is avoided by saying, 'A box of Kotex, please.'"
I mean, God forbid you make the man at the store counter blush. In short, menstruation is a problem we need help with. In fact, two ads from 1925 and 1926 literally read,
"Science's solution to women's oldest problem.
And
A simple solution of the greatest hygienic handicaps."
oh my. Many Kotex ads used words like hygienic, clean, dainty, and sanitary in order to frame menses, and our old-fashioned ways of dealing with it, as offensive or even dirty. Kotex ads play on the anxiety of modern women. After all, they are expected to take a more active part in public life than in their Mother's Day, and they're encouraged to display their bodies, as long as they appear pleasing to men. As to tampons, they are around in the 20s, but are mostly used by doctors and nurses to insert medicine up into our lady palaces. You're not going to find a box of them at home for menstrual use. But you also might be turning away from commercial sanitary products, as they're expensive, and simply making your own at home. DIY sanitary belts and pads are absolutely being used, though it's hard to know how widely. Our cabinet is also likely to contain all sorts of toiletries aimed at making our appearance more pleasing to the outside eye. Women in the 20s are spending more time outside the house and experiencing more casual encounters with potential bedfellows than ever before, and a bevy of ad men have stepped in to make sure we know how to make the most of it. By 1929, the annual sales of toiletries will have exploded, and the number of ads screaming at us to buy them will only be outnumbered by ads for food. Our magazines are constantly telling us how important youth, beauty, and excellent breath are if we're going to succeed in life. If we don't pamper our skin and nails and hair on the regular, disaster could ensue. You'd be forgiven for being worried when your favorite magazines run ads with big titles like
"How a Wife Won Back Her Youth," a surrender to ugliness that nearly cost a husband's love.
Even this sassy, fresh-faced flapper needs to worry, apparently, especially with her paramours coming in for such close inspection on the dance floor.
Will his lips confirm what his eyes are saying?
Warns one Palm Olive ad.
The kindly candles of last night, the telltale revealments of noon. Do you fear the contrast they may offer?
It wasn't so long ago that mirrors were fairly cloudy, casting nothing more than hazy reflections back at us, and many people didn't even have them at home. But now, they're both more affordable and much clearer, so we have more chances for self-examination than ever. Hooray! We're likely to have plenty of creams and lotions to slather on to keep our skin looking fresh and supple. For the 1920s lady, a flawless complexion is key. Beauty products like cold creams are said to erase our wrinkles and fight blemishes. For centuries, pale skin has been a marker of wealth and status. The paler we were, the more obvious it was that we didn't have to toil in the fields. There's a lot to examine when it comes to the relationship between skin tone, race, and skincare products in America. A fraught landscape, to be sure. The prevailing beauty standard in the early 20s still skews toward smooth, pale skin, which means there are plenty of skin bleaching agents on the market, used by white women and women of color alike. We'll look at this more closely in our episode about cosmetics and the beauty industry. For now, it's worth mentioning because one major change we see in terms of skincare in the 20s is we are starting to go for a tan. Partly because we're much more interested in outdoor pursuits, sports, and sea bathing. Coco Chanel is credited by many as the one who makes the bronzed look fashionable. When she takes a cruise in 1923, she makes tan skin look healthy and covetable. A tan starts to become the marker of status. I mean, only those with time and money for a luxury vacation can really acquire one. So, by 1929, there are self-tanning products on the market for those who want to fake the look at home. We'll talk more about 1920s cosmetics and the industry that fuels it in a future episode. For now, let's skip over our pressed face powder and get ourselves dressed. First up, we'll slide into our underwear, which were referred to as knickers, bloomers, or step-in drawers. These are essentially wide-leg shorts with an elastic waist, made of lightweight material such as crepe de chine, silk, or cotton. Next is our bra, or bandeau brassiere. It's very similar to our tube-like bandeau tops in our modern day, but these come with straps. Our bandeau brassieres are usually made of lace, silk, or rayon, although brassieres for bustier ladies are made of heavier cotton or brocade. One of the most popular brassieres is the Symington side lacer, which can be laced, you guessed it, at the sides. By the end of the decade, women will begin wearing bras with actual cups, thanks to a little company called Maidenform. Whatever brassiere you choose in the 20s, though, its ultimate goal is to squash our gourds down, flattening our chests as much as possible. We have plenty of other underwear options in the 20s. If we're wearing a dress, say, we might opt for the cami knickers, which are basically a form of romper. If we're going to visit our parents, we might pull on a corselet. Traditional lace-up corsets are still being worn in the 20s, especially by older women. But many younger gals prefer a lighter corset brassiere combination. The corselet has side fasteners, shoulder straps, and long elastic panels or light boning, all designed to help us create the 1920s body ideal: tubular, boyish, curveless. Next, we'll pull on our rayon stockings. Rayon, you say? Not silk? That's right. Rayon was invented way back in 1846 and began being manufactured in the US in 1911. It was called artificial silk until 1924, when the name rayon was coined, and is popular as a far less expensive alternative. There are those who consider it inferior. After all, rayon is quite shiny, isn't it? Good thing we have talcum powder, which we often use to mat our shiny, stockinged legs. We are going to hold up our stockings with elastic garters that fit snugly around the thigh. When it comes to what we're wearing, you've probably already got an image in mind. a sparkly, columnar, body-skimming, sleeveless, drop-waisted dress, decorated with fringe that gives us the occasionally scandalous flash of kneecap. It's the iconic flapper look, but it's not what everyone is wearing, and especially not during the day. We talked about that look in some detail in the Flappers episode, so make sure you tune in to that one. But to think that all women in the 20s are wearing flapper fashion is like saying that all women in the 60s were wearing miniskirts. It's not only cutting edge, but edgy, a statement rather than the status quo. And a lot of the boldest high-fashion flapper looks were really reserved for the elite. But the 1920s does have a distinct fashion look, and the era brings a kind of democratization to fashion. Those who might not have been able to dress the latest styles before can increasingly afford to do so. It helps that the fashions of the 20s are, by and large, so much more practical and comfortable than what came before them. During World War I, a huge number of women stepped into the jobs left behind by men fighting in the war effort. They worked in factories and drove buses and generally got some pretty important stuff done. They couldn't very well do all that in big skirts that might get sucked into machinery. They needed more practical, functional clothes to work in, including a variation on knickers, aka slacks. Once the ladies had experienced life in trousers, they weren't about to go back to bustle skirts. Know what I'm saying? Indeed, a lot of them weren't going to go back to spending most of their time in the kitchen. As we'll find out more about in our next episode, way more women in the 20s are working outside the home. They need fashionable and/or practical clothes to do that work in. That means no more Victorian whalebone corsets or the Edwardian age's complicated bustles. Instead, we get a no-muss, no-fuss approach that is more suited to what we're doing: work, sports, driving, and, of course, dancing. This simpler approach to women's wear in high fashion arguably started with a designer named Paul Poiret, whose innovative designs are all about getting rid of the corset and the Edwardian S-bend. But make no mistake, this guy was not all about women's liberation. "I freed the bust," he proudly said of his designs, "but shackled the legs." It is visionary designer Coco Chanel who really takes the 20s look to a whole different level. Born in 1883, she grew up quite poor in the French countryside, without money or connections. But she didn't let that stop her from having some adventures. The quintessential new woman, she had no time for the fussy fashion of old. She preferred men's fashions and found ways of making them work for her. "One day I put on a man's sweater," she would tell a journalist, "because I was cold. I tied it with a handkerchief at the waist." And soon she was surrounded by admirers wanting to know where that outfit came from. "If you like it," she supposedly said, "I'll sell it to you." She opens a tiny shop in France, and her simple, comfortable fashions become highly coveted amongst the wealthy. A lot of these dresses are made from jersey, a material no one was using to make dresses before the 20s. Think the kind of sweater dress you can actually breathe in. Chanel brings in elements that were previously reserved for men's clothing: sailors' collars, reefer jackets, mechanics' dungarees. She feminizes tweeds and flannels, once the province of men's hunting jackets and button-downs. Every outfit seems to suggest that men and women are, could it be, equals? Our favorite sassy lady journalist, Lois Long, praised the fashions, saying that now women had clothes they could wear while doing almost anything. "Suitable for participation in all save the very strenuous sports, such as mountain climbing, lion hunting, and the exploration of the Arctic." Of course, not everyone loves this blurring of sartorial lines. One grumpy 1920s man complains that
Women no longer exist. All that's left are the boys created by Chanel.
one of the most influential changes we see in women's fashion is the introduction of what we might consider sportswear. Women with money have always had more time to indulge in sports than her working-class sister, but she's mostly always done it in impractical clothes. A keen horseback rider and outdoor enthusiast, Chanel doesn't want to mess with outfits that are hard to move in. She, like many of us 1920s gals, is playing more sports and getting more into fitness than ever before. Designs like Chanel's give women clothes that are easier to truly move in. She does more to free our busts than Poiret ever could. But here's a pressing question. Are we 1920s ladies wearing pants? Sometimes, but only in pretty specific situations. For example, we might wear men's-style knickers if we're out playing golf or horseback riding, or if we're a lady aviator jumping behind the wheel of a plane. Schoolgirls might wear knickers as part of their uniforms. Women at home or at the beach might slip into silk pajamas. If you're a fan of Miss Fisher's murder mysteries, picture those flowing white pants she's always rocking. These palazzo-style, high-waisted numbers will grow increasingly popular for their comfort factor, almost like leggings have done in our era. Something the daring woman might wear to a house party with friends. But only the edgiest and most devil-may-care lady is going to wear pants to work or out dancing. It's going to take several decades more before ladies in pants become anything less than a scandal. One of the great things about this era's fashions is they're a lot simpler to achieve. With shorter sleeves, creeping hemlines, and simpler lines, they require less costly fabric. Back in 1884, most dresses required some 6 yards of 48-inch wide fabric. By the mid-1920s, it's come down to under 3 yards of 54-inch fabric. And the lines of these styles are simple enough that the thrifty gal might make them on her sewing machine at home, even if she's less than confident with the needle. All the ladies' magazines are offering sewing patterns and courses to their readers so they can create their own high street looks at home. We also benefit from the easier, higher volume clothing production that emerges in ready-to-wear. World War I taught us a thing or two about producing high quantities of clothing and doing it with new and cheaper materials. Thus, department stores and mail-order catalogs give even the fashion-forward country gal a chance to buy a crepe-de-chine skirt without breaking the bank. But the problem with accessible fashion is that it puts the pressure on everyone to participate, particularly if you want to be successful and popular. On average, we 1920s dames are spending more money on clothes than we did before the 20s, and we're feeling fashion peer pressure more keenly. As one 1920s mom complains, "The dresses girls wear to school now used to be considered party dresses. My daughter would consider herself terribly abused if she had to wear the same dress to school 2 successive days." The daywear look Chanel helped cement as the 1920s daytime uniform is chic but casual. We might wear a pleated skirt and a sweater blouse, or even a loose-belted cardigan. If we're wearing a dress, it's likely to be drop-waisted, and since it's daytime, it is very likely to have sleeves. We'll slip on some very low Cuban heels, and we will absolutely not be leaving the house without our clothes-chat. This fitted, brimless, bell-shaped number frames the face and perfectly complements our bobbed hair. Now our tummies are rumbling, so let's go make some breakfast. Our kitchen isn't stocked with all the latest 1920s inventions, like the bread slicer, garbage disposal, and the KitchenAid mixer. In fact, many of the new household items featured in mail-order catalogs are too expensive for most of us and won't become affordable until the 1930s. We do have a toaster, though. We might also have an icebox. If we do, ice will likely come to our place every day or so, cut in giant blocks from frozen lakes, stored in warehouses, and delivered to our doors by brawny delivery men. Refrigerators have been invented, but they're mainly used in hotels and restaurants. By the end of the 1920s, only 8% of households will own an expensive electric refrigerator. Many won't even have ice boxes, which means that, in many cities especially, we prefer to shop for food daily rather than trying to store it. For our breakfast, we're likely to have something light. Before the 1920s, breakfast was usually a hearty affair, meant to fill you up for a long day of manual labor. Now, though, breakfast consists of toast or cereal, because most people are working in offices or factories rather than the fields. Based on the many sample menus found in Good Housekeeping's Book of Recipes, published in 1922, we'll definitely be having coffee, courtesy of Maxwell House, who is already using their trademarked slogan, "Good to the last drop." No drip coffee makers for us, though. Those will only arrive in the 1970s. We might be making our coffee with an electric pumping percolator, which produces a very bitter brew, so we will definitely be adding cream and sugar. We're also likely to have some toast, which might even be Wonder Bread, first brought to market in 1921, which will go on to become the first pre-sliced bread to be sold nationwide. That said, we will see that classic combo of bacon and eggs on some of our tables, thanks to marketing genius Edward Bernays. He's hired by the Beechnut Company, a packaging firm who invests heavily in bacon, and persuades 5,000 doctors to promote the combo as particularly good for us. But we ladies are more likely to reach for prepackaged, supposedly health-increasing cereals like Wheaties or Kellogg's Bran Flakes. After all, we're all about counting our calories. Diet fever seems to have swept our nation. Why? Well, first, because being underweight is less of a public health issue now that there is an abundant food supply. And while we ladies are much more active when it comes to sports in this era, people are a lot less active generally, thanks to automobiles and white-collar jobs. For the first time, chronic diseases like heart disease surpass epidemic diseases like polio as the leading causes of death. And so a series of public health campaigns began to inform the public about the importance of exercise and mindful eating in the 1910s. Then, when America entered World War I, food had to be rationed, and dieting was encouraged as both healthy and patriotic. The government created food conservation campaigns featuring the daily recommended caloric intake based on your sex, age, and physical activity. Wartime weight loss clubs formed, and magazines ran articles with titles like, "Are you a fat hoarder?" and "How dare you hoard fat when the nation needs it?" Although the war ended in 1918, diet culture unfortunately continued, thanks in part to modern fashions. Off-the-rack, mass-market clothing starts introducing standard sizing, which seems to skew pretty thin. Women's bodies are increasingly on display in the 1920s. No more hiding under your giant hoop skirt. Advertisements, magazines, and films of the time aren't helping. We are constantly surrounded by images of a thin, curveless, flapper-esque ideal, and a growing conversation about the body, self-discipline, and self-improvement. In 1925, the New York Times reports that the penny scales in department store bathrooms receive so much traffic that they're more profitable than their gumball machines. Such scrutiny is formalized thanks to the Miss America pageant, which begins in 1921 as a way to foster tourism for Atlantic City, and whose purported aim to find the most beautiful bathing girl in America not only puts women's bodies on display, but measures them. The first Golden Mermaid trophy is won by 16-year-old Margaret Gorman, who, like all the other contestants, has her measurements taken in front of more than 100,000 spectators. Yikes! What are American women doing to trim up? Many are playing sports. For the first time in America, light physical fitness is considered a modern and fashionable form of recreation. Physical education classes, organized sports clubs, and college teams for women all begin in earnest. We even see some professional female athletes. They compete in 8 events in the 1920 Olympics, and 4 bring home gold medals in swimming and diving. But for your average gal, high-intensity exercise is still a no-no. Most of us aren't pumping iron or doing anything like CrossFit. It's considered too strenuous for a woman's femininity. Instead, walking, cycling, swimming, golf, and tennis are recommended to achieve a svelte, graceful figure and a youthful glow. You know, as long as that glow isn't from sweat. Exercise is considered a great way for us to stay healthy. But if we really want to lose weight, the experts say we need to focus on dieting. Luckily, or unluckily for us, there are plenty of mass-market diet products to try. The reducing corset, the electric massaging roller, diet pills, laxative chewing gums, and dieting cookbooks, as well as fads like 3-day liquid diets and steam baths. Other than that last one, I think I'll pass. The most common method of losing weight, though, is calorie counting, thanks to one Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters. Dr. Lulu's calorie counting book, Diet and Health with Key to the Calories, was published in 1918, and it sold 2 million copies, making it America's first best-selling diet guide. It includes gems like the following. A daily reduction of 500 calories is equivalent to the loss of 2 ounces of fat, which amounts to 4 pounds per month or 48 pounds per year. Dr. Lulu's readers are mainly white upper and middle class women who can afford to pick and choose what they eat. But she also gets letters from working women who want to share their progress, as well as some teenage girls. When a 14-year-old writes in about limiting herself to just 1,000 calories a day, Dr. Lulu congratulates her. It makes me happy to know you are following my advice and getting out of the fat girl type. Way to raise the self-esteem of young women everywhere. When letter writers complain of headaches, dizziness, or hunger pangs because of Dr. Lulu's prescriptions, she tells them they'll soon become accustomed to it. In fact, she recommends 2 cups of moderately hot water with the juice of lemon, a cup of fat-free bouillon, or half an apple. Sounds delicious. Unfortunately, Dr. Lulu isn't the only one pushing the fat-shaming agenda. When one mother writes to a 20s advice columnist saying that she doesn't know how she can be expected to diet when she's so tired from her household and childcare duties, the response she gets is less than empathetic. The columnist writes that she knows a vivacious woman with 5 children who wears the same dress size as her teenage daughter. With only 1 child to look after, the letter writer really ought to look like a flapper and act like one. The weight loss narrative is all about willpower and mastery of the body. Nina Putnam writes in her 1922 book, Tomorrow We Diet, you can get as slim as you want to, but 2 things are required of you. 2 little eensy-weensy things. Self-control and intelligence. The ideals driving diet culture are very similar to many of the other popular progressive ideals of the time: self-control, moral righteousness, and asceticism. No surprise when you consider that these same ideals help drive the country into the arms of prohibition. And so dieting becomes a project of moral superiority and self-discipline for both men and women, especially with doctors telling them that losing weight will increase energy, efficiency, and even intelligence. But the dieting craze affects women so much more than men, because they are being told that losing weight will make them more attractive to their husbands, which of course will improve their lives. We 1920s ladies are indoctrinated by the pervasive idea that being thin means being healthy and happy. And we wonder why body image issues are so rife. Now that we're finished with our low-calorie breakfast, let's crawl out onto the fire escape and listen to our downstairs neighbor's radio. It's 9:30 a.m., which means our neighbor will likely be tuning into one of our favorite programs, Housekeeper Chat, which is typical of the radio programming directed at women in the 20s. This show is created by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Home Economics and Farm Radio Service, the government branch dedicated to assisting farm wives. Housekeeper Chat is hosted by Aunt Sammy, a role played by different home economics specialists. Each Housekeeper Chat features 3 sections: backyard gossip, questions women are asking, and what shall we have for dinner. So many listeners write to the show to ask questions and request copies of the recipes that the USDA compiles them into a book and distributes more than 100,000 copies. But why are we mooching off our neighbor? Why don't we have a radio of our own? Radio communication has been around since the start of World War I. The technology advanced rapidly, and by the 20s, radio receivers are starting to be mass-produced for the average consumer. But like so many other newfangled gadgets, they're expensive. In the early part of the decade, radios are about $150. That's more than $2,000 today. They're also pretty impractical, run on what looks like a small car battery, which often leaves unsightly acid burns on the floor. It's only after 1925, when manufacturers create a receiver that plugs right into the electrical current of the household, that radio sales really start to take off. But just because they're AC-powered doesn't mean radio sets are attractive. Golda Goldman, writing in Radio News magazine in 1926, describes the latest radio her husband brought home as something which made the living room look like a garage just after the Ford has been taken apart. Turns out that many women won't allow their husbands to bring radios home because they don't want a bunch of ugly wires and speakers and tubes running all through the living room. I mean, that's fair. Once manufacturers realize they have to make radios appeal to feminine design tastes, they start creating sleek radio sets with compact components disguised as cabinets and furniture pieces. That's when sales start to skyrocket. Gee, look what happens when you take women's opinions into account. Still, the golden age of radio won't really begin until the 1930s, when they become cheap enough for the majority of Americans to afford. But the radio offers Americans new ways to connect and communicate. Children's serials, vaudeville acts, soap operas, and situational comedies like Amos and Andy are all common radio entertainment. In 1922, the Yankees-Giants World Series draws a record 1 million radio listeners. Sports are a massive source of entertainment in American culture in the 20s, and people love being able to listen to the big game when they can't attend the event itself. This is especially true for Black Americans, who are often barred from sporting events due to segregation. You might also turn on the radio for political news, market reports, weather forecasts, lectures on home economics, farm reports, and classical music concerts. The New York Philharmonic even has a weekly radio concert. So what are we up to on this fine summer day? We're going on a picnic later with some friends, so we're gonna start cooking. What are we making? Probably some 1920s staples: an orange pecan salad, baconized meatballs, and apricot jelly cake, all popular summertime fare. But where are we actually buying our groceries? This is worth dwelling on, as grocery shopping in the 20s is mostly considered a woman's job. Here in the city, we get most of our food from public street markets, peddlers who sell their wares door to door, and tiny neighborhood grocery stores. This means most of our food is fresh, and grocery shopping is done pretty much every day, especially if our icebox is small. When we walk into our tiny local store, there are no aisles stocked with food. Instead, we'll walk up to the counter, we'll tell the grocery clerk exactly what we need, and he'll then go into the back room and get it. And because most items are sold in bulk, the clerk will have to measure things out for us. If you want some cheese, he'll weigh it. If you want vinegar, he'll pump it into a small bottle. This means you end up developing a personal relationship with your neighborhood grocer. This is part of the reason you can get away with purchasing your groceries on credit. After all, that guy knows where you live. These local grocers offer other services too: letter writing, translation services, cooking advice, and neighborhood gossip. If you're too busy to pop to the store, you can place a phone order and get your food delivered, although most women are too suspicious of the staff filling orders incorrectly or substituting high-quality goods for lower to do this very often. They prefer to go to the store counter themselves and barter for the best cut of meat. Haggling is a regular part of our grocery shopping. Interestingly, prices aren't advertised at your corner store, so you don't actually know what your bill is going to be. This becomes a problem when food prices go up after the war. The cost of potatoes, for example, rises 147% between 1913 and 1923. This is true of other things too, like rent and clothing. All cost about twice as much in 1923 as they did 10 years before. Thus, the average 1920s family is probably spending a third of its income on food. Enter the chain grocery store. Packaged processed food is now hitting the shelves, including many of the brands we can find in the store in our era: Heinz tomato ketchup, Log Cabin syrup, Campbell's soup, Wonder Bread, popsicles, and Aunt Jemima's pancake flour, Baby Ruth candy bars, Haribo Gold gummy bears, Double Bubble bubblegum, and my favorite, Reese's peanut butter cups. These items can all be found at the Piggly Wiggly, Kroger, or Safeway, national grocery store chains that grow exponentially during the 20s. One of their perks is that they offer self-service, and that is attracting we ladies in droves. The idea of women selecting their food items without any help is considered rather modern, so much so that many chains run ads emphasizing its progressiveness. Many remind Americans of women's important role as the consumer of the family. Major chain A&P even runs a series of ads in the Saturday Evening Post designed to convince men that grocery shopping is just as difficult as an office job. Daily, the wife must purchase the family food needs. Countless brands, grades, and prices are confusing, yet she must decide. And she does, wisely and profitably. Give her credit. A&P, compliments will get you everywhere. Enough with shopping. In a few hours, we'll hop in our friend's fancy automobile and head out on an afternoon adventure. But let's leave our time travels there for now. In our next episode, we're going to put on our suit set and head to work in the 1920s, exploring all the ways we ladies get to business and the struggles for equality we have to endure. Until next time. Thanks for listening. There are lots of ways to support the Exploress. Tell a friend about the show, leave a review wherever you listen, become a patron, buy some merch, or just send me an email telling me what you love about the show. I always love hearing from you. You'll find show notes and lots of resources for this episode at my website, theexploresspodcast.com. Much love to Carly Quinn for her help researching and writing this episode, and thanks to Blake Farha for his vocal stylings.